Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, to ask a question over the phone lines, please press star 1 and record your name at the prompt. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to your host, Marian Emmer. You may begin.
Good morning. This is Marian Emmer. On behalf of the NIH, I'd like to welcome you to this morning's teleconference and to thank you for your great interest in participating in this discussion with us today. Here at the table this morning, we have Dr. Francis Collins, Dr. Walter Korschetz, who will introduce Dr. Vicki Whittemore, Dr. Avindra Nath, and Dr. Brian Wallet. Each will make very brief opening remarks, and then we'll open the phone call for your questions. Please be patient with us through this process. We will try to get to as many questions as we can in the time we have available to us this morning. Now, Dr. Collins.
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. I wanted personally to join this call to thank you for joining us for what I hope is an ongoing conversation about ME/CFS and how we can move the needle forward together on characterizing the cause of this perplexing disorder to help with better diagnosis and treatment. I want to assure you that from the perspective of the NIH director, that this institution is very committed to this area of research. Speaking for many of us, we want to move the research agenda forward here, both in terms of intramural activities, which you'll be hearing about, and extramural research programs as well. I'm happy to tell you that with regard to the intramural effort, we have received IRB, that's Institutional Review Board approval, and expect to be able to launch this study at the NIH Clinical Center and then begin to enroll individuals this summer. I have great confidence in Avi Nath, who's the principal investigator, who's going to speak to you here shortly, who will lead this important study, and he can tell you more about it. The website describing the intramural protocol actually went up this morning. If you haven't seen it yet, this will give you a lot of the details about the design of the study and how it's going to be conducted. And I think this is a remarkable opportunity to try to bring the full power of this really remarkably interdisciplinary research hospital to bear on this set of serious questions about what are the causes of ME/CFS. There's a lot of heterogeneity, of course, in this condition. The choice here was to focus on individuals who had had previously good health and then a clear-cut onset in the context of a flu-like illness in order to limit the heterogeneity and provide us with a better opportunity for getting answers. And we believe that this study in the world-class clinical center of NIH has the opportunity to provide some new insights that could be transformative for all of those who suffer from this condition. So in addition, on the extramural side, a vigorous, reinvigorated trans-NIH working group is working to define the strategic areas of research that would form the basis for a request for applications to the extramural community, both in the short term and in the longer term. And Dr. Korschetz can tell you more about where we are about that particular set of discussions. We're quite serious about looking for opportunities to expand our research in this area and to recruit new investigators into the field, bringing new eyes and new brains into the issue of trying to understand the puzzling aspects of this that previously have eluded us. So please take our commitment with great seriousness. Please also stay the course with us as we seek to identify the most compelling research questions and how we can address those. I understand many of you have waited a long time, perhaps, to see this kind of attention. I hope you understand how much we are now looking at this in a very serious way and seeking to come up with some of those answers. So if we can work together on that and not work apart, I think we have a much better chance of making real progress. We are your partners. We want to hear from you. That's why we're having this call today. And we're listening carefully to the comments and the suggestions you might have about how best to move this effort forward. So that's mostly what I wanted to say by way of introducing the call. I now want to turn this over to Dr. Walter Korschetz, who, as you know, is the director of the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. Walter is a neurologist, a very experienced one, and he has seen firsthand how devastating ME/CFS can be for patients. and he volunteered to chair this Trans NIH working group and is working closely with other institute and center directors to promote research on ME/CFS. And I want to say thank you to Walter for stepping into this space and already with considerable vision, figuring out ways that we can make the kind of scientific contributions that this field very much needs. Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francis. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for getting on, and I'd like to thank everyone for the expressions of interest and even the concerns that people have sent to us. We are very interested in working together with the community to achieve our long-term common goal, and I think that common goal is shared unanimously, which is to find better treatments for people who are suffering with ME/CFS. And I can just like to start off by talking about the big picture. The intramural research protocol, I think, is one step, but only one step in the trajectory that we need to get on to get answers that are going to be very helpful for patients. And so this is, I think, a long-term quest. This is a difficult problem. I think if it was not difficult, it would have been solved long ago. So I think we need to kind of get out there and bring in the best and the brightest from many different areas of science. I don't think we know where the solution is going to come from. So I think we need to cast a wide net, get involved a number of very experienced researchers and clinicians, and work carefully with the doctors who are taking care of the patients. So we, as Francis said, I think the important thing is to stay the course and to look always to the long-term goal. At NIH, we have some bureaucracy, which is not easy to understand, but I would like to simplify it, if I could, that there is basically an extramural program, and the extramural program are funds that go from the NIH out to universities, companies, other institutions to do research. And there's the intramural program where research is done at the clinical center in the Bethesda area. The clinical center is the world's largest research hospital and really our only research hospital. It has tremendous resources, but 90% of the funds from NIH go out to the extramural community. So in the long run, what we need to do is to engage both the extramural and the intramural community. And you'll hear about the intramural protocol, which is starting up, but you also heard mentioned from Dr. Collins that we have a Trans NIH working group. As I mentioned, we don't know where the solution for this ME/CFS problem is going to come from, so it's very important to have the scientific input and the funding resources of multiple institutes at NIH to bring them to bear on this problem. The Trans NIH Working Group has representatives from all the institutes and is working to develop plans that will move funds to very worthwhile, highly meritorious research proposals in the extramural community. And we have the intramural program protocol, which is going to be run by Dr. Nail. With that, I'd like Vicki Whittemore to briefly describe the Trans NIH Working Group and what it is about and thinking of doing in the short term and the long term. Vicki?
Good morning. This is Vicki Whittemore, and I'm a program director at the National Institutes of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And I also would like to thank all of you for being on the call this morning. I've been working with Dr. Koroshetz to coordinate the Trans NIH Working Group, and I have to say it's really been a pleasure working with representatives from the staff of the 23 institutes and centers who make up the working group. Everyone's really dedicated and passionate about what we're doing and what we're working on. We are in the process of putting together, as Walter said, both a short-term plan where we can try to activate some research on the shorter term, as well as initiatives that would put in place better infrastructure as well as research funding for longer-term research projects. And some of the things we've been talking about, clearly as the community has communicated to us as well, the priorities of developing and identifying biomarkers for the disease, really understanding the underlying causes and mechanisms that lead to ME/CFS, as well as getting a handle on and understanding what is causing what patients refer to as brain fog, or the cognitive symptoms that many individuals with ME/CFS experience. So our timeline is that we're working very hard to put this plan in place and to present our initiative to the appropriate councils for approval in the May timeframe, and we will be able to move forward with initiatives soon after that. So we will be looking for input and feedback from the community, and I think several ways that we're thinking about doing that is to put out specific requests to the community for feedback on ideas we have and things we're thinking about, to have additional follow-up conference calls after this one in due time, as well as to reach out to the research and clinical community to get feedback from them as well, as in terms of what we're thinking and planning. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Koroshev.
So I just want to clarify one thing, because I'm sure people are wondering out there, why can't we actually say what we're thinking? So it is important to understand that NIH has processes that ensure that research comes in and the most highly meritorious research is funded, and that all groups have a fair hearing when they come in. So what we can't do is we can't put information out that would give, before it's ready to be made public to everyone. So that's why we have to do a lot of work behind the scenes before we can make things public. So it's a kind of something that's idiosyncratic, but it has its real purpose in presenting a fair and open process here at NIH. And now I'd like to say also that, as I mentioned before, I think it's going to take an army of really good researchers to solve this problem. I think that army has to work together. It can't be individual groups working in isolation. So what we'd like to do is to form consortia, really, of investigators who are working hand in step, not all doing the same thing, but allowing a lot of innovation. And the first horse out of the gate is the intramural program. So I would like Dr. Nath, if he could, to try and briefly describe what the intramural protocol is all about. And I would say that Dr. Nath is calling in from Liberia, where he's doing field work in Ebola. And so we're very gratified that Avi can get on the call, and we hope that his line stays stable from Africa. Avi, would you like to describe the intramural?
Well, thank you very much, Walter. This line should be fine because I'm using one at the U.S. Embassy.
Okay, good.
So, thank you very much. So, I'm delighted to be the principal investigator of the intramural study. And when Dr. Collins and Dr. Koroshev asked me to consider this responsibility, I was actually very thrilled to be able to look at the syndrome and see if there is an immune or neuroimmune component here that may be driving the disease. That is an area of my expertise. I've firsthand seen a lot of patients with the disease and know exactly how devastating it can be. And so when I looked at the literature, it was very clear to me that there are very good reasons to believe that this is likely immune-mediated. And so I designed a protocol that would address those kinds of issues. So the proposal I put together has 3 phases to it. The first phase is a cross-sectional study, and that's the protocol that's on the web and all the information that many of the groups have received. However, then the plans are a second phase study. The second phase study would be a longitudinal study, which will follow patients over a period of time with repeated testing, but only with a small subset. The first phase study has a lot of various kinds of investigations we will do, and then we'll identify the ones from there that look most promising. And then in the second phase study, much larger population, different types of populations, and then be able to study them over a longer period of time. And then the third phase would be an intervention study. So based on the information that we gather from the first and second phase, that will guide us as to what kind of immune modulatory therapy would have the best opportunity of making a difference in this patient population. So that, in summary, is what we were thinking about as our goal towards developing a research protocol for chronic fatigue syndrome.
Thank you very much, Avi. Can you still hear us all right? So now I think I'd like to turn to Brian. Brian Wallet is a medical officer at the National Institute of Nursing Research. He has considerable clinical and research experience in fibromyalgia and ME/CFS research, and he'll serve as a lead associate investigator to help Dr. Nath coordinate the activity of a large number of investigators who will be involved in the study at the clinical center. So Brian, you want to tell us a little bit about what brought you to this really interesting protocol?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Walter. Hi, I'm Brian Wallet. I am the lead associate investigator on the intramural protocol here at the NIH. My experience with all of this starts as my career in rheumatology, where I had a lot of experience with hospital immune disorders and developed a specialization in fibromyalgia and myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. My interest in the disorders grew over time and led me to open a research clinic at Georgetown University, where I saw patients on a regular basis. My patients taught me just how real these disorders are. They are not just in one's head. They do not reflect some unconscious choice, and it is not possible to simply push through the symptoms. I tried my best to help my patients and learned just how limited the options really are and why there is an urgent need for a restorative treatment, one that would give patients their lives back. I promised my patients I would do my best to find better answers for them. This passion is what led me to come work at the NIH. Since I've been here at the NIH, I've been learning the ways that research is done here. I've learned a great deal about science from the world-class scientists that I get to rub elbows with. I'm very lucky in that regard. I am very excited to help Avi Nath facilitate the protocol. I believe it's going to provide some important answers to the big questions of ME/CSF, the role of infection, the role of immunity, and the role of neurology in the generation and perpetuation of symptoms. We're also going to try to understand exactly what the biology of post-exertion malaise is, and I believe these things will move the needle forward, as Dr. Collins said, and I'm very excited to be part of this.
Thanks very much, Brian. So I'd also just emphasize that the protocol at NIH has 26 associate investigators in addition to Brian and Avi, and they bring this really incredible expertise to the table in the study of the patients with ME/CFS in this protocol. And this ranges from very high-level neuroimaging to high-level ability to look at cytokines, autoantibodies, and we have people like Leo Saligan in the Nursing Institute as well, who has been looking at chronic fatigue in patients with cancer and rheumatologic disorders. So we have a really quite an amazing group here, and it's different than what you might see in a hospital on the outside because everyone here is full-time devoted to research. And so the community of researchers is quite extraordinary. And also the tools that we have in the clinical center are quite extraordinary. Very difficult to bring a patient in who's very ill for research at a hospital any longer. But here we have an inpatient unit where we can study patients over multiple days, even weeks. So we're hoping that the resources of the clinical center will allow us to do some very unique things. But I would also emphasize once again that this is a stepping stone. This is only one piece of the puzzle. I think it's a very important piece, but our intention is to coordinate it with many of the other pieces that we're going to start initiating across the country. And with that, I'd like to open the phone to questions now, and we'll do our best to answer them. And once again, if we are not able to answer all the questions, they can be directed to a website, braininfo@ninds.nih.gov. So thank you very much, and let's open the lines. First question.
Thank you. We will now open the questions and answer session. If you would like to ask a question over the phone lines, please press *1 on your phone and record your name at the prompt. To withdraw your question, press *2. One moment, please, for incoming questions. And our first question comes from Robert Miller. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Robert Miller. I'm a longtime patient and advocate. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Collins, Dr. Korshitz, and the team for taking this key first step in doing the clinical center study for NECFS. I think it's a long time coming for this patient population. But I'd like to start off and address actually possible treatments, and in particular the treatment Ampligen. And I'd like to ask what homework has been done thus far regarding Ampligen, and if there's been any talk with the FDA, as this is the only treatment ever to be into phase 3 trials for NECFS. And that opening for this drug potentially could lead to this drug being this patient population's AZT, opening the door to pharma for much more research. And most importantly, it would give relief to many suffering patients. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Miller. And, indeed, as I mentioned, the goal that we're all marching towards is to try and get a treatment. And clearly, to start off, I think we are going to challenge our investigators to survey the area of therapeutics that have been tried in ME/CFS, others that might have been tried in other illnesses that might come into ME/CFS, because those are more the short-term wins should they be effective. Developing new therapies is, basically a 10 to longer process, so that is very important. And so we certainly at the NIH have open door policy for people to come in and propose research, and we have certainly met with many investigators and even the Hemispherics company people, and they presented the data that they have from their previous studies. And so that's certainly something that we are taking into serious consideration. As I mentioned earlier, there's a process at NIH for funds to go out. So the process is, again, a peer review process where investigators submit proposals. They get looked at by the leadership, and then they go out to a peer review system, and they kind of poke holes to make sure that the best proposals get the funding for the American taxpayers. So that's the system that would have to be engaged. Very different from an industry system where the industry makes a decision to put the funds down and they take all the risks. Here we're working with taxpayers' dollars, and so the process is very important to uphold. But certainly we are looking at that, and we expect that we'll be having discussions on clinical trials as they come forward. So thanks very much for that question.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Donna Pearson. Your line is open.
Very much. There is substantial confusion between the disease that you're studying and other conditions involving unspecified chronic fatigue, and that confusion impacts research, medical education, diagnosis, treatment, and care at every level. And I know that the name is not an issue that many people want to talk about in research. However, a name is the single most obvious way to distinguish a disease from another disease. And the IOM clearly agreed that a name change is appropriate and suggested establishment of a new ICD code. So my question is, does the current study and the tests that you will be doing have the potential to determine if encephalomyelitis is in fact an appropriate name for the disease?
I'm not sure if Avi's still on the line.
Yeah, I'm here, yeah.
Okay.
So, we're not looking at every single aspect of the disease. We're looking at a select population. And in that population, we can certainly tell you if there's evidence of inflammation. And if there's evidence of inflammation, then I think it's fair to say that it represents an inflammatory process in the brain. Whether you will use the word encephalitis, the problem is that you have to demonstrate that there's infiltration of cells. Just activation of the immune system in the brain alone is not sufficient to call it encephalitis. You can get activation of the immune system in patients with Alzheimer's disease, with Parkinson's disease. We don't typically call them encephalitis. So, but I think we will get closer to that answer because we will be able to look at a panel of cytokines, and we may have some suggestion as to what kinds of cells are producing those cytokines. And so, yes, we will get closer to that definition. Whether we are able to establish it beyond an element of doubt or not won't be from this study. We are planning some animal studies, and I think that it will be a better chance for being able to answer this. So the animal studies will take lymphocytes from the patients, inject it into the animals, and try to reproduce the disease. If we can, then we can look at the brains of the animals and actually tell if their cells infiltrating or not, if we produce the phenotype or not. I think those kinds of studies have a much better chance of being able to answer the question that you addressed.
Let me just add a couple of points because I think they're important to understand. And I'd say that the protocol at NIH is interested in trying to get at the biology, the biological basis of the illness. Now, eventually the biologic basis of the illness in most other illnesses is eventually what moves the definitions and allows breakup in the heterogeneity of a disorder into particular biological entities. That process is a long process. And so I would urge people to basically stay the course there. Clearly that this protocol, which is looking currently at 40 patients, what they find will then need to go into another stage to be validated in other groups of patients to make sure that it's a real finding that can be generalized. So generalizability is the next step that would come when a discovery is made. One reason we think it's real important to organize ME/CFS researchers across the country is because many studies have discoveries, but they're never really validated to know if they're generalizable. And so I think we have a lot of clues in the literature, but one thing we need to do is to make sure that they can be generalized across the population. And the expectation is, I think, that there are multiple different types of ME/CFS, and it may not, something we find here may not generalize. This protocol is for persons who develop the condition after a flu-like illness. There are other ME/CFS patients who develop the condition after other types of exposures, environmental exposures, allergic exposures, traumatic exposures. So we can't solve the whole problem with this one protocol. This is, again, a piece of the puzzle. I urge people to think of it in that way. Okay. All right. Can we go to the next question?
Our next question comes from Court Johnson. Your line is open.
Thanks. As I'm sure you're aware, Ron Davis is has taken on a similar exploratory study. So what I was wondering was if it's possible for Davis to follow up on findings that you get, and vice versa. Can your team follow up on findings that he gets? Is it possible for him to give him some funding to be able to do that? And my second question involves the exercise study. Stacy Stevens and Workwell have worked for years to develop standardized exercise protocols that work for ME/CFS patients. The exercise portion of the study is probably a critical part of the study. Is the team planning to contact her and work with her to be able to use a similar protocol in their study?
Okay, Brian, could you address the exercise protocol, and then Avi, maybe if you could address the data sharing next.
So the exercise protocol for the study that we're doing in the intramural program is designed to induce post-exertional malaise. Right? It's a maximal effort exercise intervention. It's designed to provoke symptoms as opposed to being a treatment. The CDC, Beth Unger, has a lot of experience in doing this kind of work, and we're going to be talking to them about designing proper ramps and so forth. However, we are open to suggestions from all people with experience, and we would be happy to reach out to others that may have useful things to add as we design the intervention.
So let me just, this is Avi, let me just add to that. So, I did talk to Dr. Davis, and we're absolutely delighted to collaborate with him. The kinds of studies he's doing is not exactly the same that we're proposing to do. So I discussed that in great detail. We actually exchanged a number of...
Oops. I think we dropped off Avi, but I think his point is that, yes, he has been in contact with Dr. Davis and actually a number of other investigators around the country who are collecting samples, and they will be sharing data. Now, I think also, as we mentioned, what we're hoping to do is to set up a series of investigators around the country who can work in concert with each other and share data, particularly with regard to looking at the second issue I mentioned before, which is generalizability. Can you, if you find something in one group and you check another group that you think is similar, do you see those same findings or not? Unfortunately, the history of these kind of biomarker studies is such that a lot of things fall out and don't replicate, so you really need to do this coordinated approach to make sure that what you're putting your money on is a real thing, a real finding. Okay, can we go to the next question?
Our next question comes from Charmaine Proskauer. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you very much for this opportunity to have a discussion. I think this is great. You may have already answered this question in parts through things that you've already said, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why only 40 ME/CFS patients? I realize that this is a very deep study, but with 40 patients, does that have the danger of falling into the category of just another pilot study with numbers too small to be really meaningful? That's my question.
So let me address that. This is Avi.
Question, yeah.
So there are two aspects to it. Number one is we're going to be screening patients. Going to take us a while. Then when we admit the patients, they're going to be in for a week. So it'll take us one patient per week. So even if, give and take, 40 patients is going to take you a minimum of 1 year just to study 40 patients. Plus you got the controls. So it's going to take you a while to actually get through this population. So if you increase them more and more, it's going to take you longer to get to the answer. The other thing is that we're selecting a very precise population. If in 40 is that we've calculated a lot of sample sizes based on the information that we have. If you don't find a neuroimmune abnormality in 40, then it's unlikely to be a major driver of the disease. And I'm pretty certain that this is a decent sample size for us to be able to find those kinds of immune abnormalities that we're looking for. So I think the sample size is pretty decent, and it gives us an opportunity after that, as I said, we'll do a longitudinal study. So then you can enroll as many patients as you want from, all over the country, and other people can participate in the study and take those findings and look at multiple groups. So you have the second phase of the study that allows you to do a more expansive study. But you don't want to do a huge expensive study the first time around. If it takes 1,000 patients to find something, probably isn't worth chasing at all.
I think I'd also add that at NIH there's a culture which is actually to try to learn as much as you can from every single patient. So there are, for instance, an undiagnosed disease clinic here where people come with diseases that could not be diagnosed on the outside, and they found causes for many of these patients. They're all different, though. So I think, it's also possible that with the kind of in-depth analysis that there may be very robust findings in even one or a small group of patients that will be very important. So it's a little bit different. It's definitely not an epidemiological study. This is, the NIH is much more, its advantage is in deep study of small numbers. But I think as the question, posed, the issue that to actually get the answer for all the patients who have ME/CFS, this is just one step, and we have to see what we discover and how generalizable it is to the population, and that's going to require multiple steps and a larger group of investigators. So can we go to the next question?
Our next question comes from Joni Comstock. Your line is open.
Hi, I represent ME Advocacy, a grassroots nonprofit organization advocating for patients suffering from ME. Our focus is the severely affected patients, most of whom are homebound and bedbound. Some are so sick they're unable to care for themselves. We were dismayed to learn that the protocol and design for the intramural study has been well underway without any input from the ME/CFS expert clinicians, researchers, as well as from the patient and advocate community. This became even more disturbing as so many flaws were revealed about the study. These deficits showed us that many of the ingrained agency misconceptions of the disease still exist and have not been clarified. Therefore, we initiated and delivered a petition with 725 signatures to Dr. Collins to stop the study and start it from scratch with stakeholders' input from the get-go. Because of ingrained institutional misconceptions, whether deliberate or not, we expect the NIH to engage the expert community on any ME/CFS study from the moment of its inception. They should have input throughout the entire process. This includes the planning and implementation of the design, recruitment, trial, analysis, study outcomes, peer review publication, and the publicity. Do you intend to respond directly to ME Advocacy about the petition, and how do you plan to incorporate our concerns?
Well, let me just start. I appreciate your concerns, and our intent is to reach out and get input from a wide variety of folks with expertise and with experience in this illness, and we have been doing that right from the beginning at NIH through the Trans-NIH Working Group, through the CSF Advisory Committee. We've had multiple meetings with experts in the field and with advocacy groups. I must say it has been a challenge for us because we may not have reached out to everybody, and we apologize for that. But it's been very difficult to know exactly who everybody is, and that's the reason we have these calls. And this is not going to be the last of our calls, but it's only the beginning. And we will learn from patients. I think the history of medicine is that as you work with patients, the patients teach you lessons. And so I think that the major teachers at the NIH really have to be the patients who have made the sacrifice to join the protocol, to come into the clinical center, and to work with the doctors. I think that's where a lot of the input's going to come. And the protocol itself, Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but the protocol is always a work in progress. So a protocol gets put up, it has to get approved, then it moves forward, then there are amendments, they have to get approved again, then it moves forward. So, and the protocol is something that's going to have to be tested. It'll probably be bringing in control persons to see if they can manage the protocol as it stands before we bring in patients with ME/CFS and put them through the protocol as it stands. So I think we are definitely interested in getting input, but in truth of the matter, the scientists at the NIH they have to be the ones who are empowered to work with their patients to try and get at the bottom of these what is the biologic nature of ME/CFS. So we are very interested to move ahead, and we can't, take all patients with ME/CFS or the very severe cases who are homebound. I think would certainly not be wise to start there. I don't know, Brian, if you have any points on that.
Part of the protocol is to look at post-exertional malaise, which requires pushing patients a bit and being able to exercise and being able to do things. Taking a homebound population and stressing them more may lead to untoward consequences for the patients, and we need to be concerned about those things. It's definitely a very important population to study, but that might be for the next phase.
Right, and I think the clinical center does have the ability to bring people into the hospital who are in very poor condition because it is a hospital and has 24-hour nursing. So it is something that we could potentially get to at some point, but I think it would be probably unwise to start there. So again, I apologize to the community for the perception that we're not listening, because we are very much listening. And we will continue to listen, and we will continue to communicate best we can. So thank you very much for that. Could I have the next question, please?
Our next question comes from Lily Chu. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning. This is Lily Chu. I was one of the co-authors of the IOM report. I'm also the co-vice president for the International Association for CFS-ME, but my comments today are my own individual views. So I have 2 points. One is about the study itself, and the second is about staff. One of the things I found when I was reviewing the literature for post-exertional malaise is a lot of literature only looked primarily at fatigue as a symptom. And I'm trying to review the website you have up right now. And again, it says that you're going to have a diary of people recording their symptoms for at least a week once they're back home, and that's good. But it says fatigue symptoms. So what I would suggest is, PM is more than fatigue. And in our report, we talk about things like people having problems thinking, problems having sleeping, sore throats, enlarged lymph nodes, all over muscle pain. So what I would suggest is that you ask for more symptoms than just fatigue, and that you leave some open-ended areas where people can put in their symptoms. The second thing is timing. So most studies, they just take a period, like 2 days, and that's when they collect their blood tests or their other tests and their symptoms of patients. And what I was finding from reading the literature, talking to patients, and some data I have that I'm analyzing right now is that the timing of PM can vary a lot. So ideally, it would be nice if you could time the test to when people are saying, this is the peak of my PM, or even like have it after 1 day or 2 days, because sometimes people's PM does not start until several days after whatever the triggering event is. In this case, it looks like you're doing a treadmill to induce the PM. So that's my point about process. The points about staffing, I'm really glad that you have some experienced people on this project, including Dr. Lipkin. But one of my concerns is that you have both Dr. Wallet and Dr. Gill on the staff. And I'm sure you've heard a lot to some degree already about Dr. Wallet. My concern about Dr. Gill is back in 2011, he did a talk for NIH, and he had a lot of slides in there about pacing, not about pacing, but about graded exercise therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and about not ordering certain tests, like, for example, tilt table testing, because they weren't suggested by the CDC at the time. And so there are some concerns there. I can send you links where a lot of the community had concerns about Dr. Gill, and I even wrote Dr. Gill a letter before his talk. I hope that his views have evolved and changed since then. So if he's changed, that's great, but I have a little concern about that. Even if you have the right people selecting the patients, the people interpreting the studies have certain biases, and we all have biases, but those need to be recognized when they go in to analyze or interpret the study. So I'm wondering if the staff that's on the study, are they going to be reading things like the IOM report, the NIH Statement of Knowledge Conference report from 2011 even, and the ARC and NIH reports more recently? Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to ask Brian to talk a little bit about the protocol with regard to the symptoms you mentioned, the time to peak, and then the docs working on the protocol.
So That's a very good point that what exactly post-exertion malaise has been poorly explored to date. What we're going to try to do here at the NIH is to induce it and describe it as it happens. This will be done qualitatively by speaking with the patients and listening to what they have to say and hearing their descriptions of it. We may even do a qualitative study of the words that are used to describe it, as well as biologic measurements that are taken sequentially, starting before the exercise and following it over the course of their hospitalization. And the hopes is that we'll be doing all sorts of different biological measurements that try to capture different aspects of the biology of post-exertional malaise. And so your comments about timing are very true, and we are taking that into consideration.
Great. And
so let me address another issue. This is Avi. So, throughout the protocol, there will be continuous seminar series, journal clubs, so on and so forth, so that the team that is working on the protocol becomes well aware of the existing literature, the emerging literature, the pros and cons, and the critiques of previous protocols and previous studies as well. We're going to have invited speakers come and talk to us so that we have a cutting-edge knowledge and state-of-art techniques that we are using in order to study the syndrome. And that's how we conduct all our other protocols too. So that's no different than we would do for my other protocols as I would do for this. The other thing is the way I've designed the study, there's no element of subjective bias, because really what I'm looking for are immune abnormalities. Those are going to be done in my laboratory. They're going to be done in the Center for Human Immunology. And although there are 26 investigators there are about, if we include the people in various laboratories and others doing the study, there are over 150 people. So there are a huge number of people producing the study. I ultimately interpret all of these things, and then we will make the findings available to everybody. And there's an advisory group that looks over our studies as well as our findings. So I'm not really concerned.
Right. So Avi dropped off again, but I think the point is that NIH is a very unusual place in that the people are here to try and get at the bottom of problems, and they have really the strictest scientific minds, and I rarely, if ever, seen what you might call a personal bias affect a study. So I think everybody here is really devoted to just getting to the bottom of the problem, and I really do not see any chance that this is going to be corrupted at all. It's a very unusual place where there's very little incentive, and actually it's a career breaker if that ever happens. So I really do not feel that this is a concern that the community should worry about. So thanks very much.
The design of the protocol is not going to allow any of that anyways.
Yeah.
No?
Right. Okay, great. Can we go to the next question?
Okay. Once again, as a reminder to participants, to ask a question over the phone lines, please press *1 on your phone and record your name at the prompt. Our next question comes from Jennifer Spatilla. Your line is open.
Thank you. And thank you, excuse me, to everyone on the panel, especially Dr. Collins. I appreciate your personal appearance here today. I have, as you can imagine, a million questions. I'm going to focus on three. First question for Dr. Koroshetz, can you make a commitment to this community today that a request for applications with set-aside funds is going to be part of the short and long-term strategy coming out of the Trans-NIH working group? My second question for Dr. Nath or Dr. Wallet is why the selection of Lyme disease as a comparison group? There's a lot of overlap in the chronic Lyme community and the ME/CFS community, people being diagnosed with one when they may have the other, and also there's a question about reliability of the testing. So if you were looking for a post-infectious group with no sequelae, I wonder why something like resolved influenza might not be a better comparison group. And then the third question for Dr. Whittemore is how are you going to systematically incorporate patient and subject matter expert input into this
study and into the formulation of strategy, I think these town hall meeting calls are a great tool for you to use, but it shouldn't be the only one. And I know I would really like to see some more systematic involvement of both patients and subject matter experts throughout the phase of the strategy. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. Let me talk a little bit about the first question, which was the commitment of funds and RFAs. So given the processes I mentioned at NIH, I can't really say that. I can tell you that that's our goal, that's what we're working towards, and we're hopeful, but I couldn't say publicly what we're going to be able to do until we have a plan that we can make public. But so I hope that's helpful. In terms of the Lyme disease, Brian, would you like to take that one?
I can handle that. This is Avi.
Avi, okay.
So the reason I asked for the Lyme disease group is because there are two reasons for it. Number one is it's a patient population of convenience for us because Adrienne Marquis, who is an infectious disease expert at NIH, has a patient population. She specializes in Lyme disease. So she already has a well-characterized population of patients who we know she has for certain had Lyme disease and they did get better or they did not get better. And so we could very easily recruit from an existing cohort. And so when we thought about, okay, if we want to control population, this is not chronic Lyme disease, so that's the other thing I want to make absolutely certain. These are individuals who had an infection and then they did not develop any of the chronic symptoms. They fully recovered. So in that sense, they're pretty close to the healthy normals because normal individuals also develop infection at some point in time and most healthy individuals recover from it. But here this is a specific infection, a sample size of individuals who already exist at NIH, and we can easily recruit from them. They've already been studied at great length, so we can actually use the information that already exists on them. So all those things considering, that's why we chose this line. Not that the influenza population is not worthy of studying. I think that would be fine too. But we picked this for the reasons that I mentioned.
If I can also add, the onset of Lyme disease has some very specific physical findings, in particular the rash of Lyme disease that helps us understand exactly when the infection started. And so when we're trying to look at people that are after the infection, it makes it easier to figure out actually when the infection started and pin down the time.
And Vicki, do you want to talk a little bit about engagement of the community as we move towards extramural plans?
Sure. So for the involvement in the community with the Trans-NIH Working Group, we're thinking about initiating a period of time with each of our working group meetings when we can open the lines and have input and or potentially presentations from various members of the community. Again, using our website to push information out and also to get feedback from the community would be really helpful. And I think we're also always open to any thoughts that the community has. We're thinking about some workshop ideas where we would involve the patient and clinical and research community in the organization and putting that together and also then welcoming patients to attend that meeting. I'll let someone else address, maybe Avi, address involving patients in the study, intramural study.
Can you say that question again about involving patients as advisors or enrolling?
She's asking about the patient advisory group, Avi.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So we looked into some of the legalities about patient advisory groups, and it's a little bit complicated in the federal government. But nonetheless, what we are absolutely committed to is getting input from patients throughout the study itself. So I think some input we've already received, and we're going to come up with a system whereby we can get continual input from patients and patient advocacy groups as our study moves forward. As Dr. Korshets mentioned earlier, the protocol is a process and evolution. Just because you wrote up a protocol doesn't mean that's exactly the way it will be conducted. There are a lot of changes that occur through the process, and so continual input is necessary throughout the life of the protocol. And so we're happy to receive that, and we're happy to work with the patients and the advocacy groups for that purpose.
I think that also the patients who enroll are going to be they're going to have a lot of influence on on the docs and how it moves forward. Okay, so thank you very much. Can we go to the next question?
Our next question comes from Wilhelmina Jenkins. Your line is open.
Good morning. I'd like you to especially thank Dr. Wallet for being here, and I understand that Dr. Knapp spoke specifically to the importance of keeping personal bias out of any research that goes on. But I wonder if Dr. Wallet, just to allay the fears and concerns of the community, could speak directly to that himself. And I'm sure you understand the fears of the community based on many studies that have taken place, particularly the PACE studies in England, that we are very concerned about that problem of bias within a study, that it has been shown to affect the results. I understand Dr. Wallet has worked with patients, and I would just like to hear him speak again about how his own view of this illness will be incorporated within the study or will not affect the study.
Thanks very much. Brian?
First, let me affirm by saying that chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis are a biological disorder. Research has shown that in every system of the body that has been investigated that there have been abnormalities when compared to healthy volunteers. If chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis is all in your head, it's only because your head is part of your body. In regards to my individual role in the study, I am serving really as a facilitator of research, helping to coordinate all the scientists and all the medical professionals that we require to make this happen, and to help provide care and to be a cheerleader for the patients as they come through the protocol. I don't have a bias, and I don't have an outcome that I hope to see, except that we find an answer that makes people better.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian.
We have time for one last question.
Just be one moment.
Then let me just fill the gap by saying I know there are others of you waiting to ask questions of us. Please, thank you for your participation this morning, and send us those questions. Please send your questions to braininfo@ninds.nih.gov, and we will make our best effort to respond to you in a timely manner. Thank you again for participation. One last question.
And our final question comes from Deborah Woroff. Your line is open.
Oh, so we must be close.
Hello, we can hear Deborah.
It's Milstein. I think.
Deborah, you have an open line.
Okay.
We'll skip on to the next question. Final question comes from Rizka Solomon. Your line is open. Rizka, you currently have an open line.
Hi, sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for holding this this meeting today. So I've been sick 26 years, much of that homebound and bedridden, and it's obviously devastated my life, and at least 1 million other patients are suffering with this illness in this country. I think that we need equitable research funding at a level that's commensurate with the degree of disability and with the population numbers. I know this is a first step you're saying, but in my mind and in many patients' minds, we need probably something along the lines of $250 million a year to be able to address this illness properly. And that doesn't even count the 30 or so years that we've missed. Could somebody address that, please?
Thanks, Risa. Yes, I think for this, as unfortunately, as well as many diseases, the amount of research funding does not match the burden of illness. So all the diseases, so in our institute, we have probably 300 different neurologic diseases, and that's the case for every single one of them. That being said, the process by which NIH deals with how to allocate these scarce resources is this, tried and true process that's been in place for 50 years where investigators submit grants, they get peer reviewed, and they get scored, and then the NIH starts to pay the ones that are seen to be the most highly meritorious and go down the list until we run out of money. So the system is it's a peer review system, and what we need in some diseases, and I think in ME/CFS, we need funds to fertilize the research, to get the research going, to get really a large number of highly motivated and well-trained investigators into the field, and that's what we are planning to do in the fairly short time, is to try to get that growth of investigators. But the truth of the matter is to really get the funds towards ME/CFS to a high level on par with many other like diseases. We need those kind of applications to come in and compete against in a fair way with the other disorders. And so I think that there's a short-term process that we definitely have to stimulate with funds that are particularly for ME/CFS, and Dr. Collins is clearly behind that. But our hope is that this will actually spread, that the community will come in and begin working with investigators at universities and clinics throughout the country, and that groups will form that will submit applications that are clearly incredibly important and high-level science that gets to the bottom of the problem. So I think, again, we have to utilize the NIH resources as best we can for the long term, and I think we can do that. But we cannot do it alone. We need to do it with the patients and the advocacy groups together, working hand in hand as we try and fight this illness. So I want to thank everyone for coming on. We're out of time. We will certainly be looking at the questions that get submitted, and we will, again, set up another call where we can continue the dialogue that we started today. And I can't say how much everyone around the table and Dr. Collins appreciates the interest and the concerns of the community. It's really been fantastic. So thanks very much.
Please send any of your unanswered questions to braininfo@ninds.nih.gov. And for those of you who aren't near a pencil and paper, you can go to the main NIH ME/CFS website and simply click on Contact Us to submit those questions. Thank you again for a very productive discussion this morning.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference. You may now disconnect.